All right, another episode, RSL Random Fan Podcast. This time it's a special episode, self-indulgent one to say the least for myself. As a Crawley Town fan, I'm joined by Gary Smith, the voice of Crawley Town, and one of his uh, main co-commentators, Tony Vessey. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Oh, you're welcome, Brandt. You're welcome.
Yeah, and sadly, we are missing one other person that I would have loved to have had on today, and that was your good friend, right? Ken Ken Blackmore.
Yeah, that was a terrible piece of news, Brandt. Really, really, sad way to, coming towards the end of the season. Horrible news, obviously, at any stage of the season or even the off season. But yeah, very, very, very tragic. Last week, Ken's been poorly for the bulk of the season and hasn't done many away games with me. But to obviously get the news last week about his sad passing was, you know, terrible. Like I say, terrible timing. Terrible news, really. I don't know whether Tony's got much more to say. We obviously did our tribute on air as best we could last week. Players did their bit with their black armbands and obviously getting the victory that was needed. Don't know if you saw it, Brad, but Panuche Kamara came around the pitch at the end of the game with a shirt with Ken's name on the back of it and all that sort of thing. So it's going to be certainly a different place now at the Broadfield Stadium going forward. I don't know whether Tony's got any more sort of thoughts on anything.
Yeah, no, I think we were all expecting to welcome Ken back at some time, in the press room once he got better, and unfortunately that, tragically now is not going to happen. So, as you say, as Gary said, it won't be quite the same place in the press room because we know Ken will never come back again. So, yeah, sad end to the season in a lot more ways than one.
Yeah, I was really excited last year that we actually got to meet him. He seemed like an incredibly decent guy, just like he sounded like on the calls, and that was wonderful. But I did have a kind of a question before we get too far into Crawley Town that occurred to me. They said he's a volunteer, and what is that like to be a volunteer in a club like Crawley Town? How many volunteers do they have? My assumption is they have quite a few volunteers considering the size of the club. And is that kind of like how it is over there with clubs like Crawley?
Yeah,
I think Ken was one of a fair few volunteers. There's a lot of people around on match days who do a lot of their stuff voluntarily. Obviously, Tony does the work that he does with me voluntarily as well. So Ken doing it at away games. Tony obviously does it at home games and things like that. But yeah, I think Ken's um, history goes back a long, long way compared to maybe some of the other people that are around voluntarily. He's been a fan for sort of 60 years. Used to organise all the travel to away games when Crawley were non-league, and I think when they first came into the football league as well. He sort of fell into the bit of doing things with me a little bit accidentally because he volunteered to help me out a couple of times, and it just sort of grew from there. But yeah, people like Ken and all the volunteers around the club are, the sort of people that the club needs behind the scenes because clubs like Crawley can't run without people like Ken, and thinking of people like Carroll as well that used to do all the stuff with the mascots and things like that up until a certain stage of this season. I know there's other people around who look after people in the hospitality areas and things like that who all do things voluntarily. So yeah, clubs like Crawley certainly need a big sort of volunteering team behind them.
yeah. I think the reality is that clubs like of Crawley's size and sometimes even bigger wouldn't survive without people like Ken. And there's quite a few of them around the club and around a lot of clubs around the country that rely on those volunteers, those fans, effectively, who want to be involved in the club just to be involved without being paid. And it's gone on for years. All the time I was there, we had two guys who were perhaps had a few weren't the full ticket as it were to use an old style phrase, but they came to every away game, cleared the kit up, cleared the changing rooms at home, and all those kind of things. they did that for free and were more than happy to just get on the coach to be able to go to away games and watch, and then do their bit before and after the game. And I think that's still true today, even though we're a football league club.
Mm.
Yeah, I find it very endearing, and I was trying to think of my other club, Real Salt Lake. I volunteered to do this, and I was thinking, what are the other opportunities do they have? Or it probably comes down to size. That they probably don't have a lot of volunteers because of the scope of, how much it costs to run a club and how much is invested, and they have people that do that stuff. But I thought it was an interesting comparison,
Mm.
juxtaposition between a small club and the culture over there that's developed over, decades and decades, a century, compared to the United States, where maybe a little less focused on volunteers, still fan centric, but maybe the fans' role ends at the game. So
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
something I find endearing, like I said, and I have to look into on our side to see if I can volunteer and do more for my club. So last year, a year ago, we were in much higher spirits than we are this year. The season started relatively well, minus a lot of changes. And I was thinking back to our previous conversation, there was a lot of optimism that if Scott Lindsey stuck around, that this club wouldn't be near relegation, probably be mid-table, maybe a little better. Um, why don't we start with Gary and your thoughts on the start of the season and how it all changed?
Yeah. There was a lot of changes over the summer. I think maybe more than a lot of us were expecting in terms of players leaving the club. Um, Obviously, I think it took people by surprise the amount of people that went, and maybe some of the clubs that people went to, because you sort of had the anticipation that maybe two or three might move on, but certainly not the number that ended up leaving the club. Um, Obviously the recruitment was done, and the players came in, kicked off the campaign looking okay. Um, was the big catalyst that Scott left and went to MK Dons? Potentially, I guess. I mean, the side had suffered a couple of defeats leading up to that. Got thumped at home by Barnsley, I seem to remember, and got beaten away at Wrexham despite having sort of the majority of the game. Got beaten away at Wigan despite having the majority of the game. Um, I think, I said to the radio stations over here, I had to do an interview over the last couple of days. I think when you look back on the season, it's a season of if onlys, really. Um, you know, not speaking ill of anybody that came in to do any of the management or the coaching or any of the players or anything like that. But you just think, you look back on some of the results and you think, if only they'd held on to that lead at Bolton, 3-1 up with 20 minutes to go, losing 4-3. If only they'd held on to being 4-1 up at half time away at Exeter, only came away with a point. If only they'd held on against Peterborough at home, even at the start of April, instead of conceding that penalty in injury time and losing 4-3. That's just off the top of my head, sort of three games where those extra points wouldn't have put the side in the position that they now find themselves in, facing relegation. Um, so I think there's been a lot of if onlys all the way around. Um, do you look at the players and think were all of them sort of good enough to be in League One? Some people say yes. I know people have their thoughts and opinions on various players and whether they like players or they don't like players. But would the side be in the position that they're in now if the nucleus of that squad from last season had stayed together? I don't think they would be. I'm not saying they would have set the division alight and been pushing for the playoffs again. But I certainly think, like you said at the start of the question, Brad, that I don't think they would be anywhere near this position that they're in currently. Um, so I think it's a little bit of you have to have a little bit of a reflection about things. Like Scott said to me after the game against Northampton last Saturday, and he said before, you finish where you deserve to finish, and you play your football in the league that you deserve to be playing your football in. Therefore, I've seen his press conference today leading up to the Shrewsbury game on Saturday. Therefore, he's saying, next season we deserve to be in League Two for whatever reason. I mean, I think Scott's record for this season, for the few games that he had at the start of the season, the few games that he's now had at the end, is fantastic. If Crawley wins Saturday, they'll have gone the last 4 games unbeaten, a draw at Birmingham, and then won the last 3. They'll have 10 points out of the last available 12. And that is sort of playoff form, really. I know Exeter and Northampton and maybe even Shrewsbury, nothing really to play for. Like you would say, Saturday Crawley have got nothing to play for. But I still think they can definitely go to Shrewsbury and get the win. So, I don't know Tony's thoughts on everything.
I think, if we'd have had Scott Lindsey the whole season, we wouldn't be relegated. I think it's black and white, as stark as that. So, and Scott chose to leave for again whatever reason. Either the club at that point weren't prepared to match his ambitions, or he had got annoyed with the players and the turnover of staff in the summer, or for whatever reason he left. And the recruitment of the new manager, they obviously do their homework. Hopefully it's all about stats, and he hadn't been a manager for very long, but had done quite well in a short period of time at Gateshead. But the black and white of it for me is, if we'd have had Scott Lindsey all season, we'd still be in League One without question. And you talk about turnover of players, the squad now that are playing as they are, most of them are Scott Lindsey recruits or recruited in the summer, not in the transfer window. So the squad now, okay, you could say teams are taking the foot off the gas at the end of the season, things like that. But the squad is proving that it is good enough for League One now. So I think it is down to that period that, unfortunately, Scott Lindsey wasn't in charge.
Tony, do you think that had the decision been made to bring Scott back 5, 6, 7 games before he came back, or if the season was now going to go on for another 5, 6 or 7 games, he would have enough about him and the squad to keep them safe?
I mean, hindsight's a fantastic thing, but the day he left MK Dons is the day he should have come back.
Yeah. Or the day after.
Or the day after.
Or the day after, yeah.
The part of the ironic thing for me was when, they did get rid of Rob Elliott and they appointed his assistant for 20 minutes. He did a big interview on the Thursday lunchtime about what he was going to do with the squad and all that stuff. And then at 7 o'clock in the evening, they're announcing Scott as manager. And I felt really sorry for the guy that he'd done all this big interview at 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. And at 7 o'clock, he was out of a job.
Yeah.
I just thought that was crazy. But, and if they were going to do that kind of stunt, they should have done that the day after Scott got left, going from MK Dons.
He was unbeaten though, Tony. Louis Story, wasn't he? In his little time in charge, he did go unbeaten. Didn't lose a game. He's got a decent record. 6 hours in charge or whatever it was.
He didn't win a game either, so there's one.
No. I was actually quite amazed, delighted, obviously, on the Friday morning when I looked at my phone to see that Scott had returned. Absolutely delighted. But I Tony and I had spoken to various media teams when it was quite obvious it was coming towards the end of Rob Elliott's time in charge, and people were saying, do you want Scott to come back? And I'm sort of saying, yeah, I'd have him back in a heartbeat. But you didn't honestly think it would ever materialise. I didn't, anyway. I got to be honest. I didn't think it would materialise. Obviously, like Tony said, he left for whatever reason. It hadn't worked out at MK Dons. He'd taken a couple of Crawley players with him. But like Tony says as well, if they were going to do that, they should have done it as quick as they possibly could once he was available from leaving MK Dons. And, like we both just said, I don't think Crawley would now be in this position because Scott would have had those extra 4, 5, 6 games to get points on the board that wouldn't mean that Crawley were now facing relegation.
Yeah, Scott did mention that in an interview they asked him if he was enjoying his time off, and he said no. The first club that called him, he might have gone. So, I think you're absolutely right. Just looking at how it went down, Rob Elliott seemed like a totally decent guy, and he was having some success at Gateshead. And when he came in the first couple of games, it felt like, okay, this we're just going to continue on and play the way Crawley has been playing under Scott Lindsey, which was really fun to watch. But 29 matches, only 5 wins, 6 draws, and 16 losses. I was surprised they went as long as they did, but without making a change. But maybe that's the ownership WAGMI trying to learn from mistakes, because the last time the season before or 2 seasons before, they had 5 coaches by Christmas. So maybe they learned something, and maybe they over didn't react soon enough. But I would 100% agree that it would be it would definitely be going down in the last game of the season. But just looking at the points per match with Scott Lindsey, he's already, what is he? Since he's been back, 1.63 points per game. And like you said, that's the end of the season, and teams that are safe probably and aren't pushing for playoffs and maybe make a little bit of a difference. But in his previous stint, he was 1.44 uh, points per game, and Rob Elliott was 0.79. So there is a huge gap between
Yeah,
how they were performing. Doesn't mean they're not, one's a better coach than the other one, but we I think Scott has more experience, and it kind of shows in what he's been able to do with the club since he came back.
So, Brad, did you just say that Rob's record in charge showed him with 5 wins in the games that he had in charge?
5 wins, eight
Is that right?
draws, if I'm reading it right,
Right.
and 16 losses.
Okay. So Scott's won the first 2 games of the season at home to Blackpool, then away at Cambridge. He then won the first 2 games when he came back at home to Bristol Rovers and away at Rotherham. And he's won the last 2 games at home to Exeter and at home to Northampton. So even with that minimal, I'm not too sure how many games he was at the start of the season, but he's now had 8 games back in charge. He's won 6 times over the course of the 2 short spells that he's had in charge, compared to that chunk in the middle where Rob was only able to win 5 times. And I personally, I think that speaks absolute volumes about Scott as a coach and about what potentially could have happened had he been in charge all season.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's kind of black and white, isn't it, Tony?
it is. But it's then you think, or kind of the devil's advocate to that is what went wrong at MK Dons. Why, with taking, Horsey, Jay Williams went there in the window, Maguire, and Kelly, Liam Kelly. How can he? How did he not replicate?
Mm.
It's weird in football how you can go to different clubs and have such a drastically different result in terms of your coaching, or particularly your MK Dons, where allegedly got plenty of cash behind them. How it'd be interesting to know an MK Dons perspective as to why it went wrong for him. I mean, he was doing great up until Christmas, and then from after Christmas it just deteriorated, and they won a dreadful run. And we weren't there. We don't know, and probably will never know what went wrong. But how it can be so different from one club to the next, with possibly as good or better squad theoretically.
Do you think sometimes, Tony, the expectation levels at the 2 clubs, despite being in different divisions, is very, very different? Do you think the expectation level at MK Dons was, and I don't mean it horribly towards Crawley, was far higher in terms of the Dons feel that they should be challenging for the playoffs or challenging for automatic promotion, and that they should be in at least League One or maybe even the Championship themselves? When you look at the stadium, obviously we went to the stadium for the playoffs, didn't we? You look at the infrastructure behind the club. Do you feel like the expectation levels are a little bit different compared to what is expected of Crawley? Because I heard Scott in his press conference today just very quickly say he knows that they will be favourites for relegation again next season, because they are a relegated team coming into League Two. There won't be too many people that will think, well, Crawley will be one of the favourites to go back up again because of this form they've shown at the end of the season. Scott always seems to like to fight against the odds, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. But he was matching that expectation up until
Mm.
roughly Christmas. So he was on that trajectory that they wanted. And then it just collapsed. And unlike us, perhaps they decided to pull the trigger quickly, which is perhaps what we should have done earlier than we did
Yeah,
and got
yeah,
him back. But yeah, we could go on for 3 or 4 days as ifs and buts and maybes, and if you'd have done that, did that earlier, did it later, who knows? It just intrigues me that he had such a good spell last season. Again, I mean, to be fair, when we went up until February, March, we were just an average mid-table team. To be fair,
yeah,
we were just going to be settling for mid-table happiness and not being in the same position we were the season before, going to the last game and staying up, or the Hartlepool game. And then all of a sudden we went on this run, and the whole world was rosy and everything was great. So that's football, and that's why we follow it all the time, isn't it? It's so unpredictable, and you never know what's coming around the corner, and what can trip you up, or somebody's just going to come out of the pack and win games and games on the trot, like Doncaster last season,
yeah,
where
yeah.
bottom four and then went on that unbelievable run, but still didn't make it.
No, no, no. And they were everybody's favourites, weren't they, to get through
Yeah,
the playoffs when they were easily into the playoffs
yeah,
with 3 or 4 games to spare. And this year, fair play to them. They've obviously carried on with things, and they're coming up from League Two automatically, aren't they? But
yeah,
I obviously after the game on Saturday, I'm going to have to speak to Scott, regardless of the result, and get his reaction to the game and thoughts on things going ahead. And if it's been a positive result on Saturday, I'm tempted to say to Scott, what does he feel he's learnt about himself during the course of this season? What does he feel he now knows differently at the end of the season, which has obviously been a mixed season for him, starting with Crawley, going off to the Dons, coming back to Crawley? What does he feel he's learned? And has it, if anything at all? He might say he hasn't learned anything. He might say, I've learned that the grass isn't always greener, Gary. And, whatever he says. But I think I might judge that by, what the score is when the final whistle goes, as to whether I put that to him on Saturday or not.
yeah. Well, I can't imagine he's going to let them think they're on the beach already. Like, we always like to say in commentary, oh, they're on the beach already. They've packed their cases. Like Northampton on Saturday, second half, you could have accused them of that, which is a bit of a detriment to us as the way we played in the second half, because we were
Yeah,
by far the better side. But I don't think in any way, shape or form our 11 players will go out on that pitch thinking they don't have to try and win because there's nothing
no,
on it.
I don't think they'll be allowed to. And we said the same sort of thing on the Easter Monday, Tony, before or during the course of the Exeter game. And yet the Exeter media team had said to me, don't be fooled and don't be thinking that they won't be playing for anything, because there's a lot of those players out there that are playing for a
Yeah,
renewed contract for next
yeah,
season. The same as some of the Northampton players may well have been doing, same as some of the Shrewsbury players may well be doing on Saturday as well. And I guess the way that, some of the Crawley players will also be playing for, hopefully a
yeah,
renewed contract.
yeah, yeah. You can't, and your own personal pride means you can't give up and think you're on the beach,
No, 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 exactly.
because it can't work like that.
One of the beautiful thing about sport, and especially in soccer, is stories, right? What's the story? And watching Scott Lindsey and Crawley Town, I was disappointed when he left. I understand, why he left. Maybe he thought it was a better opportunity. But the real story is if a guy like Scott, who plays beautiful soccer, who has a system, and he's very motivational, and he's got this scrappy young club, scrappy little club moving up the table and moving up the leagues. That's a brilliant story, and I personally hope that he sticks around this time, and that because I think going into League Two next year and having Scott Lindsey there, and if the owners are committed to him and the players are committed to him and they continue to play how they play when Scott's in charge. I don't think they'd be too long for League Two. And watching them, I thought if he'd stuck around and Crawley um, attained the main goal of just staying in League One, that the following season, once they got their feet under them, next season might have been really special. And I love it when a coach and a team find each other and they understand that this is they are great together and they stick around for a while. That's beautiful and that's amazing. That's a great story. You've seen it with what Wrexham has done. Of course, a lot more money, but you've seen that how how that how that can translate to fans and coverage and just having a great culture in the club. And maybe that's more of an American perspective because they don't tend to um, get rid of coaches in any sport as quickly as they might do in soccer, it seems, just from watching. But what are your thoughts on that, the storyline there?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Brant. Really, I mean, I think there is a great connection between the Crawley fans and Scott because of what was achieved in the time that he was there. Um, he came in with half of the season to go, a couple of seasons ago, saved the club from relegation. There were people thinking that had they dropped out of the Football League at the end of that season, it might have been the start of a real sort of downward spiral, and they would have been going sort of back into the National League and the National League South, and then all the sort of the regional divisions, as it were, to try and fight their way back into the Football League. So we obviously kept them alive for that bit. Like Tony said, you know, midway through last season, they looked like they were obviously going to be safe in League Two. Made a great sort of charge for the tape towards the end, got into the playoffs on the final day. Were hitting a great bit of form. I don't think any of us, really would have anticipated the way they would have gone and demolished the MK Dons in those two games. In the playoff semi-finals. I think Scott was always fairly confident that if the side could get into the playoffs, they would go on and win it. I know it's easy in hindsight for him to say, I told the players that, if you get to the playoffs, you'll win the playoffs, etc. Looking back on it now, I don't think there was any way they were ever going to lose at Wembley with the momentum that they had going into it. And I think in terms of now, what Scott has done coming back, I think he's signed until 2028 or something like that, hasn't he? Signed about a 3.5 year deal when he came back. Um, you know, had he survived, not had he survived the club, had he managed the club to survival this season, and stayed in League One with what he did last season and what he did the season before, I think he could have had the freedom of the town of Crawley to himself. I don't think he'd have ever had to pay for another dinner or another taxi or another pint of beer on, anywhere around Crawley at all. And I think there is that great connection that Scott made no secret of the fact that he felt like he didn't have that before he first came to Crawley with the fans, Swindon. And it was something that he really wanted to work on. And I think, when Tony and I look at home games and Scott goes over towards the crowd and gives it the big fist pump, or he does it at away games, and we're obviously hoping to see it at Shrewsbury on Saturday afternoon, I think there is that wonderful connection. Scott's always very thankful of the fans, and I'm sure most managers in the league say if they're spoken to about the fans after a game, yeah, they were tremendous, and they're travelling their numbers, etc., etc. But you get the feeling that Scott really does mean it because he does feel like he has that connection with the fans, but he also knows how important the fans are to a club like Crawley. There's not always going to be 5, 6, 7,000 fans travelling to an away game unless Crawley go to Man United or Man City or something in a cup side. But for general league games, that 600 odd people that went to Birmingham a couple of weeks ago, most probably went there to take in the stadium because it was Crawley's first opportunity to go and play at St Andrews, my first opportunity to commentate at St Andrews. Scott's biggest regret when I spoke to him after the game was because of his touchline suspension, he couldn't go over and engage with the fans at the end of the game. Might have been a bit different, had Crawley been thumped sort of 3-4-0, but having got a battling draw and a point and a clean sheet against the side who'd just been crowned as the League One champions was a tremendous performance. And Scott's real disappointment was that he couldn't go and thank those 600 odd fans that had made their way up on a Good Friday as well, not just a Saturday afternoon. but a Good Friday. I don't know whether you count it as a bank holiday over here or not. I'm never really quite sure. But a Friday afternoon, he was gutted about that, and he does have that real connection with the fans. You can honestly see that when you talk to him.
Yeah, I think he's also got that a bit of, you mentioned the word old school too often probably, but he fans, old, young, want to see passion from their manager. You get to see a lot of coaches just stand on the touchline, arms are folded, and they're doing a bit of directing. And fans love to see their manager raging at his own players, raging at their players, raging at the fourth official, having a rage up with the opposition bench, getting involved, and getting a few yellow cards or getting sent to the stand. And he's got all that in him, as well as the coaching side. And like I say, I think supporters love to see that kind of passion from their manager. I don't care who they are. You see Arne Slot for Liverpool, he's the same. You watch him on the side and he's raging at the players, raging at the fourth official, and the crowd love it. So, and I think that endears, not just Scott Lindsey, but any manager to their own fans, because it appears, quite rightly, that they care about what they're doing and care about the club. And clearly that comes across with Scott, every day, every home game, every away game, every day of the week, his interviews, that he wants to win. He wants to win passionately, and he wants his players to win passionately and his fans to win passionately. And I think that's great. And
Yeah, we could.
We didn't
Coaching
get it
side of
with
things.
Kevin Betsy, didn't get it that much with Rob Elliott,
No,
but you certainly get it with Scott.
the coaching side of things that you talk about, Tony, is a strange one, isn't it? Because you can clearly see in these 8 games that Scott has had since he came back, certainly the home games that we've seen, you can see how much coaching has gone into the players.
Yeah.
And obviously what he works on the training ground. And I quite often thought, I'm not too sure what they've worked on under Rob Elliott.
Yeah.
Because there was I'm not saying there was a lack of coaching. I'm not saying there wasn't work on set pieces or attacking corners or defending corners or, playing defensively as a unit or whatever it may be. But when you look at the side play under Scott, you can clearly see, can't you, pattern of play that's been looked at, that the opposition have been looked at, and the players have been asked to play in a particular way. And it might be they've been asked to play a bit narrower in the field. It might be they've been asked to play a little bit wider to combat whatever the opposition are going to do. And Scott has quite often said to me that whoever the opposition, changed their formation today coming up against Crawley. And he said, and I think that's a credit to us.
Yeah.
Because they've changed their formation knowing that we would combat and go against whatever Scott had seen them do. I remember Scott saying to me once about a game that he watched the following week's opponents on the Sunday. I can't remember who it was. And he said, I watched the game twice, Gary. He said, I watched it once just as a fan watching the game. Took me 2 hours. He said, and then I watched it as a coach, and it took me 5.5 hours to sit and watch it as a coach, because he broke down he calls them actions, doesn't he?
Yeah.
We were good in this action and not very good in this action, and the turnover and the percentage of play and all that sort of thing. Yeah, he said it took me 5.5 hours to watch the game as a coach. He said, because I have to keep pausing it and writing stuff down and looking at the way the team are. And he's also said to me that his suspension that he's had in recent weeks as well, he said, gave him a different perspective of looking at the game, because he sat just a few rows in front of where I was commentating at Birmingham. And when I spoke to him afterwards, he said, it was great, really, because I was higher up. I could see down on the pattern of play a lot better than when I'm in the dugout, just sort of looking at things a little bit flatter.
Yeah.
Because Tony and I invited him to come and stand with us, Brandt, in the commentary position and have a proper look down on the pitch if he wanted to. It could have even been a third person. Hey?
You froze a bit there for a minute.
Did I? Okay. No, I was just saying that we said to him about coming up to do some of that with us, didn't we? Because we got quite a high vantage point. I was going to offer him the chance to do some, as a third person co-commentating, but we would have been chucked off the radio for the amount of swearing that probably would have gone on with Scott in the background.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's interesting aspects. But you can clearly see the way the team has been coached, and that some of the players obviously relish working under him more than
yeah,
they did under the previous manager.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, we could wax poetic about the connection between Scott Lindsey and Crawley Town. It seems to be uh, almost magical, but there's definitely a connection between what Scott brings to this club and what the club does for him as well. But let's talk about the team. Any huge turnover, just massive turnout through the season. Maybe if they hadn't done that and they'd kept some of these players, which according to WAGMI in their contracts, they couldn't match the offers that the other teams made for players like Orsi and Adai and Liam Kelly and Williams. But what are your thoughts quickly on the club this season and which of these players do you expect to see back in League Two with Crawley Town next year?
Um, I'd love to see Charlie Barker stay. I'd love to see Josh Flint stay. It's been a shame for Josh this season. He's been brilliant when he has been able to play. He's obviously been a little bit beset by injuries over the course of the season. Uh, I'd love to see Jeremy Kelly stay. I'd love to see Hepburn Murphy stay. I think the areas where Crawley need to look at strengthening next season, I think Crawley could do with a new first choice goalkeeper. And I think if the young lad who's been on loan for the last few games was available to come on a season long loan from Portsmouth, or even come as a permanent signing from Portsmouth, I don't think too many people would turn their nose up at that. I think everyone's been relatively impressed with the way that he's played in these last few games. Um, I wasn't there to see the Bristol Rovers game, but Tony was. But the guy that played in goal for that game, Tony, just played the one game.
yeah,
Was it that Low Tutala or something? I think people were
yeah,
impressed with him
yeah.
as a
For me, yeah,
goalkeeper as well. Yeah,
He played really
and
well. I watched that game. Yeah.
yeah,
I've seen his name be touted around quite a lot as well, because your goalkeeper is your linchpin, isn't it? And your backbone of everything else that happens. You need
yeah,
to have confidence in your goalkeeper. You need to have a goalkeeper that is confident in what they do and they're commanding. And like Tony and I were saying in the commentary last week, they've got to be almost now like an extra defender too, haven't they? Be comfortable with playing with the ball at their feet, not just shot stopping or catching crosses or anything like that. They've got to be comfortable with the ball at their feet if Crawley are going to continue to play the way that they play. So I don't think they're a million miles away, Crawley, from having a decent team that you could probably pick a team now to kick off League Two next season. But I think there might be two or three positions where they need to add and strengthen, because you've also got players like Ibrahim that will probably go back to his parent club. Kamara Doyle will probably go back to Brighton, but then probably be loaned out to somewhere again. Will he be allowed to come to Crawley in League Two? I'm not sure. If he goes on loan, I think he'd probably go League One, maybe even Championship or somewhere like that. But I only think there may be sort of two or three positions short of a very good starting lineup for League Two next year.
yeah. Goalkeeper absolutely has been the number one troublesome position for the whole season, and Stewart, yeah, he's done well those two games, but he's still, I'm saying a boy, but he's still a young goal. If we can get all these things, we need to get experienced players, but then experienced players cost money. So again, it's always that trade-off of, if you want that kind of player, you've got to pay for them. And A, do we want to pay for them? B, can we afford to pay for them? But absolutely goalkeeper. I'd say if we play with a back three, I don't think we may need to make. We've got five: Barker, Conroy, Radcliffe, Malarkey, and Flint. I think that's a strong enough five to get three in League Two. So I'm not overly desperate to get any more central defenders in. Midfield, I think Holohan's done well since he came in. Hardly seen anything of him because he's been injured, but certainly at the end of this season, the two games he's played has been really good. Anderson, the same. Jeremy Kelly's been on fire. I think he's been excellent, and we could struggle to keep him. Kamuche Kamara, he's indifferent, and then again, he's been great the last few games, and brings that bit of experience in that we've lacked a lot, perhaps over the last year or so, and not just from a playing perspective, but from my old days, from a day-to-day perspective, training, you need those senior players to look up to and to be, to provide you with an example of what how you should conduct yourself. And it's another person you can go to for advice that maybe is not the coach or one of the coaches, or they will guide you, in training more. And if you haven't got the Panucci Kamaras of this world, then I think you're missing something just from that day-to-day perspective. So he's fine. Anderson, Kelly, Holohan. So again, don't think we're a million miles away. I think it's clear that Armando is going to go. Presumably that deal's still on the table from the January window. So doubtful he's going to be around. Hepburn Murphy, definitely. Hopefully we can keep him. Will Swan played that position a lot of the time during the season. League Two player. I think he'd do okay. So like you, Gary, I don't, although you were saying Scott thinks they're going to be favourites to go down, I'm not sure about that, to be fair. And we don't need too many additions. Goalkeeper, absolute 1000% priority out of anything.
I think my two priorities, I think if I was looking at getting players in over the summer, one would be the goalkeeper, but I think at the other end of the pitch would be to try and get in a proven goal scorer of some description, someone who is going to get you 15 to 20 goals over the course of the season. Because Hepburn Murphy's been good. He's obviously got lightning pace. I get the feeling he could possibly be utilised. If they're going to play three at the back and play two wide people, Jeremy Kelly one side, Hepburn Murphy the other, and have that out and out striker, up top, as it were. Because Hepburn Murphy will leave a lot of defenders for dead. We've seen it happen over the course of this season, certainly over the course of the last few games. What's he got? 3 in the last 2 games or something, hasn't he? Hepburn Murphy, something like that. So we know that he's got absolute lightning pace. If he can keep himself fit, I think he'll be great next season. But I think they could do with adding a proper. And my thought process always goes back to somebody like Tom Nichols, who, when he left or went on loan from Mansfield to Swindon in the January window, was the sort of player that I thought could have come in and given Crawley that boost for the second half of the season to try and get themselves out of the position that they were in. I know he's a player that was there before and Scott decided was sort of surplus to requirements, but that sort of player needs to come in and just be the linchpin.
Here you go then. So do you think Danilo Orsi will be available in the summer?
Well, I don't know, because when he came in, none of us probably would have looked at him to say, well, he'll end up with 25, 26 goals this season, because it took him 3 or 4 games or 5 games even to get going, didn't it? Then suddenly he found his feet and he found his range, and obviously the players got used to him. If he became available from Burton Albion, would you take him back, Tony?
Yeah. Second half of last season, yes. First half of last season, no. So,
okay.
Same as you. I wasn't. I have to admit, I wasn't his biggest fan because, from a central striker point of view, I don't think he did enough. I don't think he won enough battles in the air. He didn't. His first touch wasn't that great, and too often the ball just came back when the ball went up to him. And then he ran those words right down my throat in the last 2-3 months of the season. So, it's a 60-foot, but he got him playing. He got the team playing and him playing to a position where he scored goals.
Yeah.
He's not done well at Burton. They've loaned him out, and the chances are he'll be available, I think. They'll offload him.
Did any of the players that were on the club last year really stand out in their new homes? And I think that, I don't know that they did. Maybe Corey Adai had a decent season.
Yeah.
But I think that's what I love about Crawley, is that it's a club that can be greater than the sum of its parts, right? It's
Corey Dido got dropped halfway through the season as well. When
yeah, so I
Crawley
don't
went to Stockport, he wasn't he was the substitute goalkeeper. He wasn't getting
right.
used for a good sort of 15, 16 games. He just and the Stockport guys were saying to me that the manager just didn't really fancy him. Not that he particularly. I think a couple of errors that had led to games sort of slipping
Yeah.
away from them. And I think that's the problem with goalkeepers. You make an error, it leads to the opposition
And
scoring a goal. You make an error as a striker,
nobody
the team have got to get right to the other end to do something about it. You
they'll
make an
say, oh, at
error as
least
a
he's created a
goalkeeper.
chance.
Yeah, exactly. You make an error, mistake as a goalkeeper, it gets punished, doesn't it, ultimately? So, but yeah, none of them, I don't think any of them really particularly pulling up trees, and doing wonderful things. Allsey, I don't know how many he got over the course of the season, but obviously at Burton he then got loaned out, like Tony was saying. Jay Williams went to MK in the January window. I've not read sort of great things about
Played.
him. Liam Kelly,
Wasn't even on the bench Saturday.
was he
So,
not?
but it
Okay,
is, he obviously had injury problems, so whether that's resurfaced, who
yeah,
knows? Kelly,
yeah,
Liam Kelly's not enamoured himself by some reports with the fans, and
no,
he's not been playing. I think he played. He did play
Lolos,
Saturday. I did Maguire.
yeah, Lolos was only on the bench when Crawley went to Bolton. I think he was
Yeah,
on
he's
the
been
bench as
playing.
well
He's
when
played last couple of games. To be fair,
has he? Okay,
yeah,
okay. I don't think he's done anything magical in terms of goal scoring,
I'd have him
but
back in a heartbeat. If I
yeah,
was going to pick one for a talent, I'd pick him absolutely.
okay,
If
okay.
Bolton got rid of him, I'd I'd drive up to Bolton myself with a contract
And drive him back. Would you
and
do the
drive
same
him
for
back.
Tola Shawadney, Tony?
I don't know. I
Does he
might, if
need
he was in the living room, I might make the journey there. But
does he need a contract extension?
there was a thing on it because the fans for him, and I think he's got another year.
Okay, okay. I
Again, hopefully,
in all fairness to him, I think he's an okay squad player. If you see what I mean. Maybe not someone that's going to sort of get picked every week, but someone who could be in and around the squad with the possibility of bringing him off the bench or bringing him in for certain games, as it were. Because I think he added a slightly different dynamic to things that Crawley had at the time.
One player that I was really surprised and was really hopeful looked like he has all the talent in the world, maybe even some intangibles, and that was Tyrese John Jules. I thought he might, but I wasn't there every week. What I saw of him, maybe he just wasn't putting the effort on the field, or he's just in the wrong position. I don't know, but he seemed like I thought, man, this guy might be something, but it didn't look like he took advantage of the opportunity.
No, I think he was one of those players who he didn't score, did he, in his time, with Crawley. He's obviously got Saturday where he could possibly score as well. But I think he looked like one of those players who needed a goal or two to sort of kickstart his confidence and give him the boost and the sort of belief in his ability to be able to be playing. I know he played in different standards, but I think he just needed a goal or two to get him off and running. If that had come early, I think we might have seen different things from him. But in the end, like Shawanli, when Scott came back, Tyrese was only being used as sort of a squad player, wasn't he, as well? And getting the odd sort of cameo to come off the bench.
yeah. I mean, Hepburn Murphy was always going to be first choice. John Jules, like you, Brandt, the first couple of games he came on, and I thought, yeah, this kid's he's got something, he's got something about him, and so whether he needs a pre-season with us, whether they'll give him that chance, and Scott can work his magic and get something out of him. I agree. I think that there's something there. It's just whether you can get it out of him or not, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
and be coached. And like he came as a free agent. I can't remember when he came now, but certainly in the Rob Elliott period. And we'll see very soon whether Scott's got the same opinion or he thinks no, we spend our money on somebody else.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you. I think keeper is getting a quality keeper in is going to be hugely important. And finding somebody to score, just looking at the stats, I think our leading goal scorer had 10.
Yeah,
that's not a recipe for a lot of success to have. I mean,
No.
if you had seven guys scoring 10 goals each, that's different. But when you have one with 10, one with I think the next is nine, Murphy, and eight for uh Katerna, um,
Yeah.
Armando. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done. I don't think, well, I shouldn't say that. I think there's work to be done, but not a lot. And I know we're running out of time here, and we can talk about this season all we want, but it's over. It's
Yeah.
I didn't make it over. I'm really disappointed. We didn't make it over this season to get to a League One game. We'll have to get to the next time they play in League One, which hopefully will be a season away from now. A year from now, we'll be talking about Crawley back in League One. Maybe if they go undefeated,
Hopefully,
they can skip and go right to the championship. Is that how that works?
yeah, that's exactly it. And hopefully,
Yeah.
getting back into League One via just automatic promotion. I know they were great in the playoffs last year, but I'm not sure I'd want to sort of go through the jeopardy of doing that again. It was
Yeah.
lovely last year because never seen them in the playoffs the first time at Wembley and all that sort of thing. But I think if they can do it and finish top three, that's a far better way to do it. And then let other teams worry about what's going on in the playoffs and things. Your job's done.
So
Yeah.
now we get to the silly season where who knows what's going to happen. I'll be watching on Saturday. Hopefully they'll send have a big send off and make it worth everyone's trip up to Shrewsbury or wherever Shrewsbury is. And then we wait and see what the owners are going to do, what WAGMI's going to do if they've figured it all out, and we can catch up before the season starts next season, and hopefully we'll have at least
Yeah.
know who the players are, unlike the start of this season.
Well,
Yeah,
theoretically, we're not going to get lots of clubs knocking on the door for players who've just got relegated, unlike last year, where we had all the exposure on Sky and the two great games, MK Dons and the Crew game, where everybody's in the shop window. We haven't got that this year. So the mass exodus can only really be we're getting rid of players, I would think, than other clubs coming in to take our players from us. So I think it will be a different scenario completely to last year.
Yeah, maybe we'll see Liam Kelly, who was key cog in what Scott was doing last season, someone like that. But I would kind of lean towards like Danilo Orsi. I agree with Tony. I would be hesitant to bring him back if that's your only option. But there's got to be some players that can get up there and score some goals that Scott Lindsey can find out of them.
yeah, he'll be doing his research. If I ask him Saturday, has he got players earmarked to come in over the summer? He'll probably say to me no. But in all honesty, he's probably got a lot of
Yeah,
information about players that he wants to bring in. He probably knows the areas that he wants to strengthen, and I would be very surprised if he hasn't got players already earmarked that might have played against Crawley this season, might have played against MK Dons when Scott was there, and he's. But there'll be players that come in where we might raise an eyebrow, like we did about players like Lolos, like we did with Orsi, like we did with Jay Williams. Jay Williams came to Crawley, ended up playing internationally for his country before the end of the season. He'd been playing for Brackley Town or
Brackley
something, Tony,
Town.
was it? Yeah, prior to that, which is very far down the pyramid, Brandt.
So he
Um,
just got promoted to the National League.
have
Funny
they?
enough. Yeah,
Congratulations to them. I'm the National League next season, just to say next season, congratulations to Truro for winning the National League South, and commiserations to Carlisle for getting relegated out of the Football League. So that is a fixture in the National League next season. So let me just tell you, Brandt, Truro is in Cornwall. Carlisle is on the edge of the Lake District. Any Truro fans that go, it's going to be about a 9-10 hour journey, maybe even more, just to get to Carlisle, then to see the game, then come home again. That is a
yeah.
fixture in the National League next season. Truro versus Carlisle, Carlisle versus Truro. Good luck
And
to any of
then,
them that travel.
and then the following week they're away at Gateshead
Yeah, yeah, or Morecambe.
or Hartlepool. No, Morecambe went.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, yeah, Morecambe as well.
Morecambe went as well, didn't they? Morecambe and Carlisle.
They're
So
gonna have.
I haven't got to make the trek to Carlisle next season.
We've
got to
got a
go to
massive amount
Barnet.
of air miles.
Yeah. Got to go
Yeah,
back to
well,
Barnet, which is not too bad for me, Brandt. That's only sort of around North London. That's not too bad.
well, you can't make me feel bad about travel distance. Our
That's
closest
true.
opponent is in Denver, and that's an 8-hour drive for me.
Goodness me.
That's our closest team in Major League Soccer. So
Yeah,
Wow.
those Truro guys got it easy.
yeah.
Yeah.
What are they complaining about? Of course,
Nothing at all.
we don't have wonderful public transit like you guys do. So, but we got tons of roads. So anyway, thank
Cool.
you for joining me. I know you probably got to get going. It's been great catching up with you. We will catch up again at the start of the season. Excited to see what happens over the summer. They take probably a couple days off, and then they're just back at it, right?
Yep.
I would guess so. They'll be reporting, I would imagine, for pre-season training, probably middle to the end of June, I'd imagine, because then suddenly in July the friendlies will get announced, and Tony and I will have to have a look at those to see if we can go along to any and cast our eye over the new players before we pick up the microphone again. Hopefully, Tony, to try and start getting the names right of all the home players and the away players.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm still getting to grips with Papadopoulos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm
Well,
glad
you
he
got
didn't
it
get too
down
many
now.
appearances this season. I'm glad he didn't get too many appearances. Thanks for having us on, Brandt. It's been great to catch up.
Thank you, gentlemen. Go Reds.
Yeah,
Go Reds.
absolutely. Yeah.
One last time on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
Go Reds. Get in there.
Get in there.
Get in there. That's what we
Get
need.
in there. Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll
Yeah.
see you next time.
Cheers, Brandt.
Cheers, Brandt. Take care, mate. Bye bye.
See ya.
See you soon.